We came here from such different backgrounds, and we came with altogether different goals. Some of the kids that were here when I was here knew why they were here, knew what they wanted to be, what they wanted to do with their life. Others, like me, didn't have a clue. One morning, it was announced in chapel that I was to report to Brother Dixon's office immediately following chapel. This met with a chorus of oohs and ahs from the whole student body. I wasn't surprised. I had appeared before the DC the night before for my latest infraction. Now, I don't want you to think that I was worse than I was. Here are 5 distinct things that I did that caused me to appear before the DC. And you know, they'll sound almost ridiculous to you now, but you have to remember when this was. I appeared before the DC for singing a Pat Boone song in chapel. No, I'm serious. It happened to have this line in it. When you go dancing, that would have done it right there. On a summer night, and her lips are tender. Anyway, you get the rest of it. I didn't think I could possibly get in trouble for singing a Pat Boone song. But I was called into the discipline committee for singing a song that talked about dancing. On another occasion, I was seen swimming at Chickasaw State Park. They asked me, did you know that that was against the rules? I said, yes, I did. Then why were you there? And I didn't want to tell them the truth. So I'll just move on to the next one. I lived in the basement of Paul Gray Hall, which meant that I had a window right at ground level. So I could actually go out of my room or back into my room without going through any of the doors. I'd open that window, crawl out. In Jackson, I don't know why this happened, but there was a bowling alley in Jackson that had a deal that you could bowl from 1 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the morning for $1. I don't even like to bowl. So on this particular night, my roommate and I were coming through the window at ground level at 5 o'clock in the morning. I had my head through the window and the light in the room came on, and Sister Hardiman was standing there. And I went before the discipline committee again. On another occasion, I was called in because I had been seen playing pool right down the way, right down here at the local pool hall. I asked one of the members of the discipline committee, I said, is it a sin to play pool? He said, no. I said, well, then why is there a rule against it? Which I should not have done. On this particular occasion, the reason I was called in is because I think the dorm mother had found a deck of spot cards in my room. I did not know. Now, this one I was innocent of. They said to me, "Do you have a deck of spot cards?" That's cards, that have spots on them, kings and queens and aces and things like that, And I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact." They had not seen me playing with it. They said, "Well, you're not allowed to have spot cards on this campus." I said, "Could you tell me why?" Well, I'll just move on. I assumed that Brother Dixon wanted to tell me, what my punishment was going to be for my latest infraction. There were 3 forms of punishment. You could get campused, which meant you could not leave the campus for a certain number of days. You could get dormed, which meant that you couldn't leave your dorm except to go to classes and to eat. Or you could get roomed, which is cruel and unusual punishment. If they did that to a dog, they'd put you in jail. I sat down. Brother Dixon said, he was very somber. He said, "John, the DC voted last night to have you sent home." He said I said, "The whole committee?" He said, "No, it was a very narrow vote." He asked me if I had anything to say. And I told him that I was genuinely sorry, that I did not want to leave the school, that I had come to love the school. I said, I thought that some of the things I've done were not worthy of being sent home for. I wasn't a mean person. I said, I don't want to leave. Brother Dixon, about this time, his phone on his desk buzzed. Apparently, it was the secretary of the outer office, and he said, "I'll be back in just a moment." He got up and walked out to the outer office. If you remember, Brother Dixon's office was very small. And the outer office where the secretary was, I think, was even smaller. He said, "John, the dean is in the outer office. He wants to talk to me." I could hear them plainly. It wasn't hard. The dean was obviously very upset. I didn't know this at the moment, but I figured out pretty soon that Brother Dixon had overruled the discipline committee. Dean was very upset. He expostulated loudly, angrily, with Brother Dixon for overturning the DC committee, which was the first I knew about it. He said, "Brother Dixon, there's no point in having a discipline committee if you aren't going to back up our decisions. That boy is a bad influence on the campus. Not only has he broken nearly every rule we have, he has been responsible for leading others to violate the rules. And on top of that, he hasn't displayed much regret." Although Brother Dixon's voice was much softer, it was very firm. He said, "Brother Gardner, I sincerely appreciate all of the work that you and the discipline committee do. You provided invaluable service for the school. You will have to admit that I very seldom interfere with your decisions. In fact, I believe this is the third time in 3 years. I am the president of this school. And I see something in that boy that apparently you don't see. I see something worthy of saving. I have a very strong feeling about that boy that I think is from God. And if we send him home, we have no idea what will become of him. But I fear the worst, and I don't want that on my conscience. My decision is firm. I will stand by it. And I will take all responsibility for what he does from this day on. Now, there will be no more discussion about this. The door opened to his office. He walked in. He went to his desk, sat down, placed his elbows on the desk, and cradled his head in his hands. He never looked up. He said, "John, I know you heard every word. I have gone way out on a limb for you, perhaps too far. I am convinced I did the right thing. I'm convinced I did what God wanted me to do. But every staff and faculty member in this school knows what I have done. Some of them think that I have made a mistake. You are going to be very closely watched for a while. And I'm afraid there are those who hope that you will fail. I want you to leave here and go straight to your room. And I want you to spend 2 hours praying and thinking about what you're going to do. Don't let me down." I went straight to my room, and I did pray. And I thought a lot about what I would do if I went home. And I made up my mind that I would never disappoint Brother Dixon again. And I never did. I left Freed-Hardeman. By the grace of God, I got a bachelor's degree in English at the University of Michigan. And I earned 3 master's degrees. I spent 66 years preaching, teaching, counseling, and coaching, all because H.A. Dixon obeyed what he believed was a word from God. And he took a big chance. And he wouldn't let them send me home. Freed-Hardeman College, Freed-Hardeman University is one of the very few places in this entire world where something like that could happen. I love this school. I don't know that anybody has ever loved it more or had more reason. After I left Freed-Hardeman, I moved 48 times, at least partly in search for a feeling that I had while I was here, a feeling of being where I thought that God wanted me to be. A place where I would never want to be anywhere else. That happened to me right here. While I was here, I never wanted to be anywhere else. I thought that this was the best place on the face of the earth. And when I left here, I left in search of that. And I have never found it. I have been a pilgrim and a stranger, looking for a city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. This last story I want to share with you focuses on the central feature of our daily routine at Freed, chapel. I love chapel. Honestly, it wasn't the speakers, although occasionally we had a good one. It was the atmosphere created by the singing. Chapel Hall had the best acoustics I'd ever heard. And although we sang a lot of the songs I had sung all of my life, we sang them differently here, with enthusiasm and fervency and depth of feeling. Chapel was the heart and soul of all that this school stands for. It was the central feature of every day. In fact, chapel was the only thing happening on the campus at that time, or in the town of Henderson, for that matter. For the next hour, every single administrator, secretary, teacher, student, maintenance person was in Chapel Hall. All three of my children attended Christian colleges. Every day they went to chapel, just like I had. But they didn't seem to enjoy it as much as I did. They even skipped. I never skipped. Well, almost never. At least I never skipped until I went to Abilene Christian. There I skipped a lot. Another thing was that Chapel Hall had character. The doors had Chapel Hall written right on them. I mean, most auditoriums would never be called Chapel Hall, not because they never had chapel there, but because it wouldn't be appropriate. Chapel Hall was named that at Freed because chapel was the most important thing that happened there, and everybody knew that. Chapel Hall had a lot of photos. Some of you remember them. They're all around. I want to tell you about one of them. Barton W. Stone, Alexander Campbell, Raccoon John Smith, T.B. Larimore, David Lipscomb. Chapel Hall was almost like a sacred place to me. I used to come in here when I was troubled by the sins in my life. And somehow in this quiet, holy place, I could pray better. One afternoon, I was here, about 8 or 10 rows back, sitting on a seat right back there. I was praying, and I heard one of those back door back there open up. A few minutes later, a pair of hands rested on my shoulders. When I turned around, I was surprised to find Brother Dixon, the school president, standing behind me. He came in and sat down beside me. He said, "Were you praying, John?" I said, "Yes, sir." "I'm afraid I'm not a very good person." Brother Dixon said, "John, there's a lot more good in you than you allow anybody to see. I'm so glad to find you here praying. I've been doing it for years. Would you like to pray together?" I said, "I'd like that very much." He said, "I often kneel when I come in here. Would you mind kneeling with me?" And so we did. We knelt in the row and we put our arms and our heads on the seat bottoms there in front of us. And Brother Dixon prayed. He prayed that God would forgive my sins. and he would give me the strength to overcome my temptations. He prayed that God would forgive his sins and help him to be the kind of man that the students could look up to. And that's what I mean when I said chapel was personal at Freed. The president of the school had come to Chapel Hall to pray, and finding a student there, he was not ashamed to get on his knees and pour out his soul before the throne of God. I mentioned those pictures. My seat was right over here. There was one at the end of the row I sat in who had a lasting impact on me. His name was William Joseph Johnston. His picture was right up there. I couldn't imagine anybody calling him William Joseph, so I made up a name for him. I called him Billy Joe. Billy Joe Johnson. Sounded like a gunfighter. I developed a serious paranoia about Billy Joe. Every time I did something wrong, which happened more often than I care to remember, when I went to chapel, I would try really hard not to look at him. But the more I tried not to look, the more I couldn't help it. Some force would make me turn my head slowly. Sure enough, he'd be looking right at me, frowning. Gave me the creeps. Quite often we had a chapel speaker, and as I said before, on a rare occasion we had a good one. One time these two kids took off on Friday night, drove to Mississippi, and got married. In Mississippi, you only had to be 18 and you didn't need parental permission. It was really a scandal on campus, you can imagine. We knew what was going to happen. We were going to get a whole week of very somber preacher types, dressed in black suits, talking to us about sex, telling us what a sorry lot of promiscuous deviants we were. I looked those words up. They weren't compliments either. Now, a whole week of preacher types talking about sex is not much to look forward to. These guys were obviously very uncomfortable, and frankly, I didn't think that most of the guys who talked to us knew very much about sex. Now, one reason for that, the first guy who came on Monday had this thing about holding hands. Now, I'm serious. This really happened. He went on and on about the dangers of holding hands. He told us that there was absolutely no telling what holding hands might lead to. Now, this guy was a preacher, so I believed him, which caused me to get so excited I couldn't wait to try it. Over the next 3 days, I held the hand of every girl on the campus. I even grabbed the hand of one of the dorm mothers by mistake. I'd run up to a girl I didn't even know, grab her hand and see what it would lead to. Well, let me tell you, it didn't lead to anything. Which was really disappointing, which goes to show you can't always trust a preacher. Now, I will say, one girl did kick me in the shin so hard I almost got kicked out of school for dancing. Well, they always saved their A guy for Friday. I was really dreading it. And I'm sure that's what contributed to the dream I had Thursday night. I dreamed that Friday's speaker was short, and he was really overweight. I mean, really overweight. He was ponderous. That's a good word, ponderous. And he was dressed in a black suit. You know, girls were always telling me that wearing black clothes would make you look thin. Didn't work for this guy. Well, he was standing up there going on about the sinful ways of young people. I got this irresistible urge to look at Billy Joe. I turned my head really slowly. I didn't want to be noticed. But for the first time, Billy Joe wasn't looking at me. He was looking at this preacher guy. And he was frowning big time. Well, Billy Joe frowning at this preacher guy could only mean one thing, and I laughed right out loud. When I looked back, the preacher guy was looking at me. And you know, all preachers have got two voices, one for talking and one for preaching. Anyway, this guy in his best, deep, stilted preacher tone said, "What are you laughing at, young man?" Doesn't that sound like a preacher? That's pretty good. I like that. He said, "Are you one of those degenerate, uncaring, profligate, onerous, licentious young men who is so steeped in your depravity that you no longer feel any pangs of guilt for your concupiscence and would laugh in the face of God?" Well, let me tell you something. I just sat there. I wasn't too sure what some of those words meant. But I knew he wasn't recommending me for the Preachers Club. He just stood up there on the stage, hovering over me like a big black cloud, which is a pretty good simile. I didn't want to say anything, but I finally mumbled, "I wasn't laughing in God's face." He said, "Speak up, young man." I said, "I wasn't laughing in God's face." Well, he said, "What were you laughing at?" I hesitated. This was going in a direction I wanted badly to avoid. I said, "Well, sir, I think it would be better if I didn't say." Well, he said, "I demand to know, what did you find so funny about something as serious as this?" I said, "Okay. If you really want to know, I was laughing because Billy Joe was looking at you instead of me." He looked at me as though he thought my driveway didn't go all the way to the street. He said, "Who in the world is Billy Joe?" I said, "He's the preacher guy up there on the wall." He's William Joseph Johnston. You see, sir, every time I come in here for chapel after I've done something really bad, he's always looking at me and frowning, and I sort of figured it was God's way of reminding me of what a sinner I am. Well, sir, today, while you were speaking, I looked at Billy Joe, and he was looking at you. And boy, he was really frowning. And it struck me as funny that you were up there coming down us for our sins. Maybe you should be more aware of your own. I guess that's not funny, is it, sir? He thought for a minute and he said, "No, young man, that isn't funny. But it's true." To his credit, he apologized. He thanked me for my observation. He gave us a memorable lesson about sin and humility and grace. And that was the end of the dream. There are all sorts of people on this earth, some very good, some not so good, some not good at all. I want to urge you to never forget that every one of us, no matter how good or bad, is absolutely lost and without hope except for the cross of Jesus and the grace of God. Never forget that there is a lot of God in the worst of us and a lot of the devil in the best of us. That should make us more humble and less judgmental toward other sinners. I sat in this room for 3 years. I sang here. I prayed here. I laughed. I cried. I listened to the Word of God here. And those years in this school and Chapel Hall left a mark on my soul that time will never erase. I'm sure that most of you had the same experience. If you hadn't, you wouldn't be here tonight. I pray that wherever you live, that you will find a special place, a holy place, a place where you feel the presence of God in a more personal way. I pray that wherever you live, you'll have a place where you can go when you're troubled and lonely and sin conscious. A place where you can pray more honestly, sing more fervently, feel the weight of your sins and the need for forgiveness and the grace of God more deeply than you have ever felt before. I hope that all of you will never forget that chapel is the most important thing that happens here.
No, I'm not doing a little girl skit. Before COVID, we got a notice from the alumni director that he would like to have us submit stories and memories about Freed Hardeman. So actually, we were camping the week before with our dear friends Barbara and Richard Peck. And we, as we do a lot of times, we were just talking around the campfire about all kinds of things and about Freed Hardeman. And I shared this story with them, and Barbara said, "You need to write that down and send that in for your memory." So I did. I wrote it, and I thought, oh, just writing it, I can do that. The day after I wrote it, we got a notice that it needed to be videoed. So I thought, well, okay. So my husband videoed, and then of course we didn't have it because of COVID. And then before this, Chris asked, could I come and actually deliver this? So I'm not used to this, so if y'all excuse me for just reading it. One of my very earliest memories as a child was singing at my grandmother's house. She didn't have much materially, but she loved singing, and she passed that along to me. Many weekends, we would just sit on her couch, and she would get out her songbook, and we would sing. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but eventually, from sitting in church, I knew I wanted to learn how to sing alto. So she was my person I tried it out on. And when I was having a difficult time, she would say, "You're trying too hard. Just close your eyes." And she would sing, and she said, "Just sing along and listen. If you close your eyes, it will be beautiful." Now, I don't know how beautiful it was. Probably not. But because she told me it was beautiful, I thought it was beautiful. So when I started Freed Hardeman, and I tried out for the madrigals, and when I got in, my grandmother was thrilled, and I was also thrilled. And I can't remember if it was my freshman or sophomore year, but it was either in 68 or 69 that we did a concert in Sikeston, Missouri. And we also did a concert right outside of Sikeston in Crowder, Missouri, which is a very small little church close to my grandmother's house. My grandmother didn't get to come because my granddaddy had had cancer surgery, so they were at home. And I was so disappointed. I didn't say anything to John Bob Hall, but he heard from someone else that she didn't get to come. So as we were leaving, we pulled down this little country road and stopped at my grandmother's little white frame house. All got out of the bus, and we sang 3 or 4 songs that we had done that day. The last song, and my grandparents were sitting out on the front porch of this little bitty white frame house. The last song that we sang was Lamb of God, and I don't know how many of you were in madrigals, but if you were, you probably sang that because it was just a great song. And as we sang that song, I looked up on the porch, and my grandmother had her eyes closed, just smiling. And to this day, I've always thought that John Bob had many things he could have been doing that day, but he took the time to go to a grandmother's house so she could hear us sing. And I'm now of the age my grandmother was. So it's really kind of a bittersweet thing, but to this day, when I close my eyes and listen real hard, I can hear us singing Lamb of God. Thank you, John Bob. I know you're not here, but maybe you'll hear this video. And for all the madrigal people that are here, I know y'all have many stories, maybe not just like that, but similar. And where else but Freed-Hardeman would something like that happen? Thank you.
I don't know about most of you, but most of us had a hard time making the financial commitment to come to Freed-Hardeman. My parents, Daddy worked for the utilities company. He didn't make a lot of money, but they tried very hard to pay my tuition so they wouldn't have to get a loan, and they did. Mother got a job, and she worked too. And I had one little joy that I didn't have a lot of extra things while I was here, but that was back in the day of Charles Chips. Remember the cans, the yellow and brown cans, tall cans? They would leave it on your porch. So that was our one little frill we had. And I came home one weekend, and Mother sent me back with a Charles Chip can full of chips. Well, my routine when I had Charles Chips was to come in from my last class, go get a Coke, go to my room, get my Charles Chips. And that's what I decided to do one day, that I had a new can of chips. I got my Coke, I went to my room, opened the lid, and every chip had a happy face painted on it with a magic marker. The culprits are in this room tonight. They thought that they would make me so mad that I would just lose it. Well, I knew that's what they wanted me to do. So I was just as cool as a cucumber. And they were so aggravated that they hadn't gotten to me. So last night, these 2 culprits are here last night at our room, or outside the hall. They were in Sewell Hall, and there's a door that opens, then you go down to the rooms. Well, I walked in, and they were both just whispering. And I saw the look in their eyes, and it's that same look they had 50 years ago when they would try to prank us. And so I said, okay, girls, I see it in your eyes. What are you going to do? And so they told me the story. And I wish we could do it. And I said, we're going to do it. I said, you're going to go through it, and I'm going to video it. And I have it on video. I made them do it last night so I could get it on video. And those people would be Burley and Fish.
I didn't make very good grades while I was at Freed. Didn't try. I didn't start making good grades until I married my lovely wife there, Vicki Smith. And then I started making some good grades at David Lipscomb and Harding Graduate School. I lived in Paul Gray dorm, and Daniel Ham, which it was mentioned earlier, is not alive anymore, but Daniel had been down in Kentucky. He came home one weekend, on a Sunday night, got there late. I had gone into Daniel's room earlier that evening and took it completely apart. Raised a window and went down the downspout, climbed down it. Went back and got in my bed and left the door ajar so I could hear what he had to say when he got in. Well, he was furious, and he went down and got our dorm mother, and they started discussing who in the world could have done that, and my name came up, and Daniel said, "Oh, no, not Charles." And I felt about this big. I told him quite a few years later, I went with him to Thailand to do missionary work for a little while, what I had done. And so he said, well, the mystery has finally been solved. But here's the real story I want to tell you. A young man from Florence, Alabama, came to my room one night, and my friend and I, Charles from Camden, Tennessee, Charles didn't make very well grades here either. He flunked out, matter of fact, went to Vietnam, got wounded twice, and has a Purple Heart on his license plates now. He's a good friend of mine. And we all know how good it is for those servicemen to protect our lives so that we can be free men in this country. But Jerry came from Florence down to our room and said, there's a man in my room, it was late that night, and I want to go to sleep, but he won't get out. Would you guys come down there and get him out for me? And I said, sure, we'll get him out. We went down there, and there was this great big old fellow sitting in the room on a chair facing the door. I said, Jerry wants to go to bed, and we want to know if you're going to just get up peaceably and leave, or do we have to throw you out? He said, well, fellas, you're just going to have to throw me out. So I said to Charles, grab that left leg, and I grabbed the right leg, and we pulled him right on out the door. Well, for some reason, he didn't go for Charles, my friend. He went for me. And I said, wait, you know, if we get into a fight at school here, we're both going to get kicked out of this school. Let's go off campus somewhere. So the next day, H.A. Dixon called me into his office, and he said, Charles, I heard you've been planning some fisticuffs off campus. And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, there won't be any fisticuffs on campus or off campus. Do you understand? I said, yes, sir. Well, the reason I understood so well, that was a big guy, and I didn't want to go off campus.
My roommate was David Petrie. I don't know if y'all remember him. A lot of people called him Doc Petrie. But one night he came in and says, we got a mission to do. So we went down, and 5 of us got in this Volkswagen, and we drove out 100 towards Chickasaw. And we got out past Chickasaw, and David and I got out, and we were lookouts down the road. We had flashlights to flash if a car was coming. Anyway, there was a sign on the Chickasaw sign that said Chickasaw, and then there's another sign that says Henderson, 7 miles. And we had a guy in our dorm named Larry Henderson. It's Parker Henderson's son. And he wanted that sign. And so they worked on it. Somebody else was dropped off up at the other end of towards town. And we sat there and waited, and it took about an hour or so. But they finally, that sign was made out of like a 2x10 and had rods through it, holding it in place. And they somehow was able to get that sign off of that. And it was probably 8 foot long. And they came back and got us, and all 5 of us, and this sign that was 8 foot long, it was in this Volkswagen. We drove back to Henderson, went up to the dorm in Paul Gray Hall where he lived, and they took a picture of him with his sign, Henderson. And then he got sorry that he did this. So he took it back out to the Chickasaw and dropped it off. That never heard from the DC file.
Coming to Freed-Hardeman was a big decision. And I have Claude Gardner's brother, Albert, to thank for it. When Connie and I had gotten married and lived in Vicksburg, Albert was our preacher. And he pushed and tried to convince me that I would make a great preacher, but I had to come to Freed-Hardeman to make it all come about. But anyway, that's kind of the way it was. So we came the first year. We were so poor we couldn't pay attention. I'll never forget the night we pulled in our old dilapidated 52 Oldsmobile and backed up to the back steps of the West White Street fourplexes, and unloaded our trunk. And wasn't the businessman Campbell, wasn't that his name here for a while? Yes. Brother Campbell. He met me there with the key. And my life, I never had an idea how it would change at just making that move. But my folks were so tickled that I got to do that. My dad was a ranch cowboy. They lived on a ranch in Oklahoma. For the first semester of my school here, my dad was making $35 a week, and my mom stuck $5 of that in an envelope for me every week. But at the end of that first year, we really weren't planning on coming back. I had built up this enormous debt of $500. The tuition was $7.50 an hour. And so we was going to work and pay that off and everything. And I got a call, and I don't even remember who it was from. They said, would you be interested in, you and Connie be interested in coming and being dorm parents at the Thompson House? Those of you who don't know what the Thompson House, it's the white house up next to the new building above Paul Gray Hall. About 12 to 15, mostly foreign students. But anyway, we came, that was the way we got to come back to Freed-Hardeman. And I got very fortunate. I got to be the preacher at Inval the last semester of my second year. And did you know we left Freed-Hardeman College with $300 in our pocket? I had never had $300 in my pocket. And I thought, where else could that happen other than at Freed-Hardeman? A second story, real short. Does anybody remember Sterrell Watson, preacher from West St. Louis? He spoke in chapel one day, and it seemed like there was a little controversy over a new church building that had installed a kitchen with a 4-burner stove. I mean, that was the ultimate. And I'll never forget, and this really happened, Brother Watson led the prayer, and he thanked God that their new building only had a 2-burner stove.
My story is sort of similar to that. I came here as a poor kid too. My father went into the United States Navy when I was 4 years old, and they sold their refrigerator. They had a 1937 Chevrolet until 1950. It was the only car they had. He was pretty handy with tools. And I remember on the way to Florida, him stopping and changing a rod on a car, a pine tree, and pull it up and all that. And I love what you said about too poor to pay attention. That's where I was. I picked up a paper route and had made big money, $20 a week, carrying the Nashville Banner, Nashville, Tennessee, and McMinnville, Tennessee. But we moved to Jackson when I was 15 and a half, and my dad, we bought groceries from H.G. Hills. He knew the manager well to give me a job. Well, a little bit bigger town can't hire kids who are not 16. So I'm here with no job, spending the money that I'd made. My parents had had some medical problems with my sister. They didn't have any money to send me to school. I'm happy to tell you today that in 7 years of college that I went through, my father loaned me $400. Other than that, everything that came along, I thank God for his blessing. Ralph, you sang this morning, and I appreciate you singing. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Oh, I love that line. I live by that line. I'm still not a rich man, but I have all I need. I'm retired. I got Social Security, state pension, mutual funds. I'm not a rich man, but I have all I need because he hath provided. I've told Yosho in Amada, and several of you have asked about the Skyrockets and Yosho and Pat, Don. Pat was going to be here today until 2 days ago. He's got a pretty weak heart, and he thought he'd better not get into trying to walk across campus or whatever. We didn't know what the situation was. So I'm the lone skyrocket who's here. Don died about 1992. Yosho died about 4 or 5 years ago. But I hold those days in my memory. And Yosho used to come to see us. We owned a timeshare in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. He lived out on Cape Cod and worked downtown New York. He became very successful with his work here. 23 years, he ran the studios for Fred Waring. He was in charge of Fred Waring's operations at Delaware Water Gap, Pennsylvania. When Fred Waring retired, Yosho became the vice president of licensing for the Harry Fox Agency, who does all the copyrights and make sure who gets royalties paid and all that stuff. He had offices all around the world. He spent 1 year in Tokyo. He came to Nashville 3 times a year to check with record companies and publishing houses to make sure that whoever wrote that song got paid for that song. That was his job with 150 employees and a whole floor on the 3rd Avenue of New York. My friend Yoshio Inamada, who met me for the first time in this hall right here. We were all in the chorus, and in those days the catalog said, if you're going to be in the quartet, you have to be in the chorus. We got that changed, by the way, with the help of Brother Dixon. But that's another story for another day. But we had these 4 try, now let's have them sit down and have these 4, how about these 4, how about those 4? 2 weeks later, Kelly Doyle said, okay, here it is. It's going to be Don Bracken, Jim Williams, Jimmy, Pat Phillips, and Yoshio Inamada. Yoshio already had his degree in music from the University of Tokyo. He had directed a chorus on TV and there. And so, what a deal. I mean, he just came here because he didn't speak English very good. He wanted to learn English so he could go to the conservatory in Chicago and get a master's degree in music and go back and translate hymns into Japanese. So he meets us in the hall right out here after found out who it is. He says, I'll tell you, my English not so good. You help me English. I help you sing good. And I marvel at this. I'm sure where I was at Freed helped me to build this value. But I wanted to be good. I wanted to be the best we could be. And with nobody supervising us, we committed to practice 1.5 hours every day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I went home on Friday night because I worked in the supermarket all day Saturday and preached every Sunday. But we practiced. And Yosho loved the Sons of the Pioneers and those cowboy songs, but we practiced. And I want to cut this story shorter than it about to turn out to be. But we got good enough that when W.A. Bradfield got behind us and started pushing us, sometimes we have done as many as 7 concerts in one day. We would leave sometimes here at 5 o'clock in the morning to make sure we could get on the ferry boat to cross the Mississippi River, to get over to Crothersville, to Portageville, to Blytheville, to somewhere, and do a concert as soon as school opened at 8 o'clock, and then maybe another one about 9:15 and 9:30, and try to get a third one in before lunch. And then 2 in the afternoon, maybe we do one at 1 and one at 2:15, and then maybe a church that night. We did 203 live performances and 35 TV shows while we were singing for Freed-Hardeman College. I'm telling you, and I've told Yosho this, God used you to get me through school. You heard that little line a while ago. I'm dime a dozen singer. There's a lot of people sing better than I could ever sing. But they didn't have a Japanese bass singer. Ba 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 ba. You know, we were different. He could write our arrangements and make our endings a little bit different than anybody else ever made it. And that L and R sound, the Japanese can never stay, you know. You don't give me the detail edge, I'm going to throw in the railroad track. You know, that was one of our encore numbers. We always used Charlie Brown and Along Came Jones, and kids go wild. But they loved Yosho, and God used him to get me through school. I believe it, I'll always believe it. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. With Bradfield behind us, we were close here to having to drop out of school because in the fall of 58, Bradfield and I went to schools. We did a little tour down through the corner of Mississippi and Alabama and came back up through Lawrenceburg and Waynesboro. And we had sold 300 of our little autographed pictures. We had 1,700 of them left. We sang to 3,500 kids and sold 1,700 pictures. I mean, half the kids we sang to bought one of our autographed pictures at a dime a piece. And we paid $17 for 2,000 of them. But somebody wrote a letter complaining that this made Freed-Hardeman look like they were pushing some rock and roll group. And they thought it made the school look cheap to let us sell pictures. So we had the meeting with the Big Five. Brother Dixon, Brother Gardner, Brother Witt, Brother Rowland, Brother Hall, and W.A. Bradfield. It looked like they were going to make us quit selling pictures. 2 of us were just getting married. 1 of us was already married. We really needed to make a dime a piece. We were going out to sing for free. The school was paying for the gasoline to get us there. But we weren't charging anything except that I had booked a bunch of Friday night concerts where we'd come out and the student council or farmers or somebody would have a Friday night concert, and we'd sing for 35 cents, and we'd get 20, and they'd get 15 cents. And we came home with our money. We actually set up a bank account that we would write ourselves a check every Friday for $25, just in case it was test week. We didn't want to go sing somewhere. We'd still have $25 to buy some grocery money, you see. I'm telling you, God provided everything I needed. My wife Lois had a scholarship because she came from Tecumseh, Michigan, the home of Tecumseh Products. And Mr. Ray Herrick was a rich man who was generous with his riches. He gave 2 boys, 2 girls every year a full ride scholarship to college. That's how I met her. That's why she was in that crowd that morning when I got up to welcome the freshmen, because she could afford to come here for free. At $600, her dad had to put $72 in to get her through that first year of school. We got married because I preached up at Sulphur Well with $35, had $25 from Skyrocket. She had free ride. All I had to do was pay for school. Well, we're getting in trouble because we're selling pictures. And this Christian lady didn't think that was a proper thing for us to do. So they're about to tell us out. Bradfield says, nuthead, remember nuthead? That's his word. Nuthead, I go out there, I give out literature, Freed, Hardeman College, and as soon as they go back to class, my stuff's laying on the floor. These boys are going in and they're selling Freed, Hardeman College, Skyrockets Quartet. They're taking it home and putting it up on their dressers. They're seeing Freed, Hardeman College. This is a little known story, but our attendance, our enrollment for the next year grew more than 20%. Because they were seeing Freed, Hardeman College. And they were thinking, I'd like to get to know that Yoshio boy. Actually, we weren't here the next year because this was only a 2-year college then, and Harding hired us as a group. We put about 15,000 miles on a 57 Chevrolet station wagon that summer, traveling all over, singing everywhere, doing, camp one night, and the church one night, and the fundraiser for Harding one night. All I have needed, God has provided. All I have needed. I got through 5 years at Harding. It took me 5 because of how much time I'd spent. But I got a BA degree in Bible. My wife got a BA degree in education, and we had no debt. Oh, I feel so hard for kids today who wind up with owing $100,000 and they got payments to make, student loans for the next day, so long. All I have needed, God has provided. I'm grateful that I came to Freed. And I'm glad there was a fellow who came back with George Greganis, a man named Yoshio Inamata, who gave me a chance to be something I never would have dreamed. I wouldn't have planned that without God's provision. I'm grateful for Freed Hardeman. It made a whole difference in me. I was supposed to come back here to teach. That's why I have a master's degree in history. I wanted to teach, and Brother Dixon said, well, we don't hire young men to teach Bible. You might get something else, history, English, something like that. So I got a master's degree in history to come back here to teach. Only problem was the salaries were $3,600 a year. And I could not afford to be a teacher here. I would have loved to have taught here. When I see what these guys feel for students, I would have loved that. So I wound up teaching high school at Hardin County High School. I taught about 15 years for Jackson State Community College and Bethel College on the high school and college level. So I became a historian. I just never got to teach a Freed. My wife taught here one semester when you were having accreditation studies and had to release a history teacher to be on the accrediting committee. And so she was here one time, and we both loved Freed Hardeman. This is where we met. This is where we married. This is where our first home was. And we've been talking for weeks about, we want to go down and see that garage apartment where we live down behind Miss Terry's house. That's a bad term for it because it's not really a garage apartment, never had any doors. I think that'd be a carport apartment. But we'll drive by there before we leave tonight because that was one of our goals. And then when we got Chris's letter about, hey, we're going to have a reunion, that's it. God has provided. He's still provided for us, isn't he? Bless his name. I'm glad. And many of you did not know how Yoshio was God's tool to me. But I will always believe that. The last 3 times I've seen him, I've told him that. He died knowing I love that man. God sent him here, and he was my blessing. Thank you for listening to me.